The easiest way really is just stick any empty frame between two drawn brood combs, and they'll draw, especially if they're nice, good, straight combs, they'll draw a beautiful straight comb right between. I've done wax strips where you just cut wax foundation in strips. I don't like it as well, mostly because if the wax moths ever chew the thing up, I got to scrape it out and put another wax strip in. If it's wood, I just scrape it off and put it back in the hive, and I don't have to mess with it. But they work all right. I haven't done this a lot, but some people have done it with a plastic one-piece frame and foundation where they cut the middle out of the frame so that they can build natural comb in it. I think it'd be more work than it's worth, but I'm not sure what I'd use to do it. Probably a little saber saw would be the tool for the job. This is my foundationless frame that I built. It's hard to tell by looking at that because it's in 2 dimensions. We're talking in 3, but if you look at the far end there, that's actually a V shape. You see the angle coming down on this side. There's another angle that looks exactly like it going up the other side, but it's hiding in the shadow. So that's a V, and what you're seeing at the bottom is the center of that V that's hanging down. This is probably my favorite kind of comb guide because it tends to be pretty strong. You can get away with a little bit of tipping it, which you probably shouldn't be doing, but you can probably get away with more of it because it tends to be a very strong attachment at the top. You tend to follow it a little better. But all in all, anything that makes some kind of point that's in the middle of the frame that sticks down will get them to build in the middle of the frame. Of course, nothing beats 2 drawn comb. If you got 2 drawn combs and you stick an empty one in between it, that makes about the best guide. This is one of them drawn out. It's a foundationless frame just before I extracted it. And yes, you can extract them, and you can see it's not perfectly attached all the way around, but it's attached some on the bottom and some on the sides. And nice thing about that too is I can cut that up for comb honey, or I can extract it, whichever I want to do. Some frequently asked questions on foundationless. Some people are all paranoid that you can't extract them if you don't wire them. You can wire them if you want. I don't wire them. A, I'm too lazy. B, the wires are always in my way. If I want to cut out a queen cell, it seems like there's always a wire running through it. If I want to cut it up for comb honey, I don't really want wires running through it. Yeah.
What size frames do you run in your house?
I run all mediums. But I know people who run all deeps who don't wire them either. But I might be more tempted to wire them if I was running deeps. But you can wire them if you want. And you can extract them. The thing to understand about extracting is any time you've got, whether it's wired wax foundation or whether it's foundationless, when you've got brand new, really soft white wax that's like putty, you're probably going to have to either be really gentle with it or just give it back to the bees and harvest the other ones. Because that stuff's just really soft and really fragile. Since I don't have wires in them, if I get that really soft stuff, I always need some good soft comb honey, and that's the best for comb honey, so I just cut those up for comb honey. I extract all the ones that are actually attached on 3 sides and look mature. The comb's mature enough to stand up to it. But I don't think they're any harder or easier to extract than wired wax because I can blow them out too. You have to be gentle with either one of them. You need to uncap them, you need to start slow, and after about half the honey's out, you go a little faster, and when most of the honey's out, you can crank it all the way up and let it rip. If you don't have a variable speed extractor, I don't know what to tell you, because I don't think I'd buy one that wasn't, but I think you'd have trouble with any kind of extracting anything but plastic on one that only has 1 speed and it's fast. But, will I mess them up? Sure, these will mess up anything. They'll mess up wax foundation, they'll mess up plastic foundation, they'll mess up foundationless. Do they mess them up any more than any of the rest of them? Yes and no. They don't mess them up more often, but when they mess them up, they tend to repeat the error. Bees build parallel combs. That's what bees do. They build comb. The next comb is always parallel to the last comb. Well, if you have foundation and they mess this comb up totally, when they move over here to build a comb, it's kind of like a clean slate because there's a wall on both sides of them to get it back on track. When it's foundationless, if they build one wild from corner to corner, the next one's going to look just like it, right next to it. So I meet people, especially with top bar hives all the time, who are it's messed up and they're hoping that the bees are going to straighten it out. The bees are not going to straighten it out. They build parallel combs. They're going to continue this mess all the way to the other end. So if you don't want them to do that, you need to step in early, not late. And the sooner the better. If nothing else, if you really can't bring yourself to tear up a bunch of messed up comb, at least make sure that at the edge of that you have a good comb to get them back on track. You know, because at least you can get them back on track. A lot of times if it's in a super and they're getting off track, I don't even get excited about it because I'll just cut them out, do some precious strain on it when I'm busy harvesting. But if it's in a brood nest, I get it straightened out. I got to be able to inspect the brood nest. I got to know what's going on. I may not inspect it all the time, but I got to be able to if I need to. So I wouldn't put up with it messed up in a brood nest at all. And I don't know why, but for some reason there's always some old beekeeper who tells some new young beekeeper who wants to do foundationless that they can't draw comb without foundation. I don't know. Oh, the drone issue. Well, bees have a threshold of drones they want at any particular time of the year. That threshold goes up like this in the spring and down like this in the summer and drops off in the winter. Some of the feral bees I see will keep maybe 6 or 7 drones all winter, but they don't have much more than that in there. If you look really hard, sometimes you can find a drone in some of the feral bee colonies in the middle of winter. But for the most part, there's almost no drones during the winter. In the spring, coming into swarm season, they really peak out, and then they kind of drop off for the summer, and then they kind of drop off in the fall. Well, they have this threshold they're trying to meet. And if you give them nothing but worker foundation, they have 2 thresholds they're really trying to meet. One of them is to have enough drone comb that when they need to raise drones, they have somewhere to raise them. The other one is that they have enough drones. So if you've been messing with that by giving them nothing but worker foundation, then the first foundationless comb you give them will be nothing but drone. Guaranteed. Because they haven't met their threshold. You finally gave them the chance. Now you give them another one, they'll probably build it all drone too, because they still haven't met their threshold. Now if you take those out and put some more in, what are they going to do? They're going to build more drones because they still haven't met their threshold because you took it away from them. Where actually, usually they build about 1 or 2, and then if you leave them in there, they'll start building workers. So some people freak out after the first couple of frames of nothing but drones. They're convinced there'll be nothing but drones if you let them. Obviously, if that was true, there would be no bees. So that's not true. So all of these kind of conversions, not treating, raising local stock, natural comb, you can do some of these naturally. I mean, you can do some of these gradually if you wanted to, but I used to be more of a believer in that until I talked to the guy who said that the contamination from the contaminated combs actually evened out within a month to all the other wax in the hive. So I don't know if that's really as good a plan as I used to think it was. Because I used to think, well, if I get these 2 contaminated combs out, it's still less contamination. I still got these 2 contaminated combs out, but the problem is I just sort of evened out the contamination. So I'm not, once I've replaced all of them, I've got less than I would have had, but I still don't, I'm still not to the point where I don't have any contaminated combs if it keeps evening back out. But still, it's a step in the right direction. Dee Lusby did her conversion. She shook all her bees off of all of the comb and threw it all away and made them all start over like they were all packages. She lost a lot of bees. She really stressed them out, but she got it done in a short amount of time. So the upside is you can get it done in a short amount of time by doing that. The downside is you're really going to stress out the bees. I would tend to go with the flow and do it a little at a time. You know, start feeding foundationless frames into your hives and start pulling the other ones out. It's especially easy to pull them out when they're empty. Come spring, you're probably going to have an empty box worth of comb you can pull out in the spring without any effort because it's already empty. During the flow, it's easy enough to harvest anything that's got honey in it and put in empty frames, and they can quickly build some new comb. I would kind of go with the flow. I would shake them all out and put them all on brand new foundation. And of course, you got to go with the flow of the seasons. Again, like I said, in the spring, you probably got some empty comb anyway. That's an easy time to do that. During the flow is the time to pull honey out of there. Don't pull it out when there's not really a lot of stuff coming in and they might need it. As far as treating, you could, if you've got a lot of yards, you could pick one yard and not treat. If you've only got a few hives, I suppose you can work your way up to more than one hive and finally all of them, but you really don't have to do any of this overnight. Although I think some of this, the sooner you stop, I think the better off you are, especially treating. I don't think it's doing what you think it's doing. How many of you seen The Princess Bride? The little guy says, the little guy keeps saying, inconceivable, and the Spaniard says, I don't think that word means what you think it does. I think sometimes our treatments are not doing what we think they're doing. They're actually causing more problems. So what do you do with all your old foundation? I don't know, I still got some in my basement, so I'm probably not going to talk. I've got a whole stack of plastic 5.4, and I don't have the heart to give it to anybody because I don't really think they ought to be using it. So, but somebody's probably out there buying some right now, and I should sell it to them just to save them making more plastic on the planet. You know? George Carlin used to say, you know, the only reason Mother Nature made us was that she needed some plastic, and as soon as she gets enough, we're done. So maybe I could postpone that if I gave that to somebody who was going to go buy some anyway. So back to this worst case scenario. Well, assuming cell size doesn't really matter, it's not going to hurt you to have natural size cells, and at least you're going to get clean wax. A lot of people are recommending rotating your combs out anyway, and if you rotated two out of 10 combs every year, in 5 years you'd have all of them rotated out anyway. And that's kind of what they recommend doing, and all you got to do is do that with foundation. Listen, you've gone to natural cell size. It's less work, and it's not contaminated. Best case is you not only get all those advantages, but you also get no growth problems and healthier bees. So that was my 4 steps. And this is, the top link there is just the one on natural cell size. The next one down is a PowerPoint presentation of natural cell size. The third one down there is a page on foundational beekeeping, when we get more into beekeeping. Now, if you want to know how all this works, I won't bore you with all the details of these, but I've had them inspected since 2004 because I started shipping queens to people. It's the first time I ever got them inspected, and it was shortly after they decided to get rid of the inspector, so I actually have to pay them, and then they pay somebody to come out and inspect them so that I can get a certificate so I can sell bees. They come out and inspect my hives, they inspect however many they happen to feel like in my home yard, and it varies from year to year, and these are their findings. I've got them from 2004 until now. Yeah. And you can see all these online if you go to my website. On the left-hand side, down a ways, there's health certificates, I think, is the topic. And I've got them from 2004 to 2012. I guess we're going to take a break. What's that? You guys want to do that? Take a quick break, and we'll be back here for questions and answers. Cool. Okay, okay, we're right here.
The hives that you used, do you still use the Langstroth boxes, but foundationless, or have you gotten into top bar or anything like that?
I'm an experimenter. I built my first top bar hive about 75. I've still got a few top bar hives. I've got probably 2 that have bees in them right now. Probably got 2 or 3 more that have had bees in them, and probably will again, but mostly I've got Langstroths on 8-frame mediums, all 8-frame medium boxes, and that's by far the majority, but I've got got so many experimental things from 12 frame deeps to 22 deeps to 33 frame horizontal mediums to whatever. But most of the I run 8 frame medium lance through hives. It's not, the thing about a top bar hive is it's very convenient if it's in your backyard. It's not very convenient if it's not, because you kind of need to keep an eye on them, and it's hard to keep an eye on them when they're somewhere you don't get to very often, and so the only ones I have are in my backyard, because otherwise I'd probably not take very good care of them. It's nice in an out yard to be able to pile a bunch of supers on at the beginning of the flow and come back when it's over. Top bar hive, I've got a fixed amount of space to manage, and I have to go out. And the other thing is harvesting frequently makes a mess of the kitchen. I'd rather do them all at once. So, what do I prefer? If you're just going to have 1 or 2 hives in your backyard, and especially if you're handy with tools and you've got scrap lumber available for free, a top bar hive's hard to beat. But if I was going to buy a hive, I'd probably buy the 8 frame mediums. It's a nice, it's all standard equipment. You can buy it from anybody, any bee supplier, and it works pretty well. Yeah.
I've got a question about sort of startup. So you have a couple of choices, I think, when you first, one, two, and when you first start up.
Like thousands, yeah.
And so one is to buy your hive locally, and usually you don't get it until late July. And you have a whole issue of building it up so that it's strong enough for winter time. Or you can get your bees from Georgia or wherever, you get them in April time frame, but then you have all the issues that, you know, you have suboptimal queens and so on. Do you have any kind of advice to help out of that?
The tough part about those choices is they're tied into all kinds of other choices. If what you want to run is a traditional deep hive with shallow supers, buying a hive from somebody locally might work out pretty well for you, especially if it's a good healthy hive. And especially if it's got local grade. But the problem is I don't want double deeps because it hurts my back trying to lift them, and I don't want large cell size because I have Varroa issues, and so I want small cell size, and they're not on small cell, and I want medium frames, and they're on deeps, and I want, so all those other issues come into play. So I pick what you want for the equipment in the long term, and then based on that, if you have these available on the cell size and the frame size that you decided you really want, sure, I'd buy a nuke or a hive or whatever, but they almost never are. So end up buying packages and putting them on it, and then try and get local cutouts and local swarms to get the stock you want. And, I think part of it is you have to look at the whole thing as kind of an art and kind of an adventure more than it is a set of plans that if I follow this, it's all going to work. Because the reality is, you can say, well, what I really want is swarm, so I'm going to set a bunch of swarm traps. Well, that's great. That's like saying I want to eat fish for supper and I want to go fishing. Might work. And I might not get any fish. So I have to take into account how bad do I want fish for supper. Because maybe you want to set some swarm traps and buy a package so you know you're going to get some, maybe you'll get some wormies. And then play it by ear. But, I think those are the things you want to consider, because if you decide you want a top bar hive, buying a nuke or buying another hive is not going to work. If you decide you want 8 frame mediums like I got, if you decide you want small cell, which I don't think you're going to survive the Varroa without, then you're going to have to start with, it's probably easier to start with a package, because then they'll build on whatever it is you want for equipment. Yeah.
You mentioned about sugar water, feeding them over the winter. We started putting fondant on top of the hive for the winter, like 10 pounds of fondant on a hive, and when they use up their honey supply, they go up and eat on the fondant. Is that okay?
I do something similar if I think they're light. I put dry sugar on top, but that's because I'm too lazy to make the fondant. But and I think it works just as well. Just put newspaper on the top bars and an empty box and dump some sugar on top, and if they run out of food and they get to the top and they eat the sugar. Do I think the sugar's better? The sugar's not as good for them as the honey, but it beats starving. And I always feed them before I let them starve. So that's what I do, and yeah, it'll work. it's not a bad plan, but then my question is, when I find myself in that position, is how did I get in this position? Did I harvest too much honey? Or did I just misjudge the fall flow? Or how did I get in a position where I need to defeat them? Because what I really want is a hive that's heavy enough that I don't need to. That's what I want.
I'm over here, Mike. To your right over here. Right side.
Stand up.
Right.
Oh.
Hi. Typical Langstroth box, they tell you in the spring move the colony from the top to the bottom so that they can store the honey on the top. You have a long hive which they build out horizontally. Out in the lobby they were talking about the ware hive where they build from the top and they keep replacing the space. The common lament that you hear from beekeepers is bees build up, right? They go up, they always go up. You put your bees in the bottom there, and in the fall, put them in the bottom, they'll build a honey dome over the top, and then they'll move up during the winter and all that. Up, down, sideways. Do you have any thoughts on, is there really a rule to this?
Anybody who's thought it through knows that it's not true that bees only move up. Because when they move into a tree, there's a hollow space in the tree, they cluster at the top, they start building comb, and they build down. It's the only direction they can build. So obviously, they not only can build down, but that's their normal direction. So to say they only build up is obviously not true. Now, will they build up if you keep sticking empty boxes above them and there's no room below them? Well, sure, they'll move into whatever space is available. Really, bees move into whatever space is available. Now, I don't nadir my colonies, not because I don't think it's a good idea, but because I'm too lazy to lift all those boxes. Do I think it's a good idea? Yeah, I think it's a great idea, and I'm too lazy to do it. Not only do I have to lift it to put them under there, but then how do I know when it's full? If I keep adding supers on the top, I can look at them and see if they're full. If I can add them to the bottom, I have no idea if they're full. I don't know when I need to add some more. So, do I think it's a good idea? Well, from a natural point of view, it makes perfect sense to put them on the bottom and have them expand down. But from a beekeeper's point of view, I'm going to lift all these boxes off so I can put them on the bottom, put them all back on top, and then if I want to see if it's empty, what do I have to do? I have to lift them all off to, well, he's got the nice ones with the windows, you just pull it up and go, no, not full yet. So that would probably work with the windows, but without the windows, I got to dig all the way down there to look to see if it's full, and I don't want to do that, I'm too lazy. So bees will move into space available. I may as well let them do what they do naturally, which is move into the space available and put the space where it's easy for me to check on it, so, and easy for me to put it there. But that's my theory.
Hi, my name is Rebecca. I have 1 year of beekeeping under my belt now, so I'm still kind of new. So I'm going to ask a nitpicky question that may or may not be important. When you're talking about having them build out the natural comb, I know it's really important for it to be level. And when I was reading up on how to establish my hives this year, most books recommended a slight pitch forward because of water and problems with the hive entrance. Is that at all a concern for me, or should I just level out my hives?
Forward is fine. If you've got a solid bottom board, forward is nice because it lets the water run out. If any water gets on the bottom board, it runs out. But forward isn't the issue. Forward is irrelevant. If you've got leaning quite a ways forward, as long as it's not going to fall over. It's the side to side that's the issue that keeps the comb in the frame. If it's too far side to side, then the comb starts on the top bar of one frame and ends on the bottom bar of the frame next to it. So the forward and backwards is fine. If you have a solid bottom board, I would tip it a little forward. If you have a screen bottom board, it's irrelevant because it's all going to fall through anyway. So, yeah.
I have a lot of questions, but could you talk about harvesting? So you mentioned you like to pack in supers and harvest ones. Can you just talk about your approach to harvesting, when you harvest, how much you harvest, how do you tell that it's left enough for the winter, etc.?
I keep changing what I'm doing, so next time you ask me this, I might give you a different answer. I don't know. Pretty much what I do now is I've reached the point with 8-frame mediums where somebody pointed it out to me and I hadn't thought about it, but I pretty much manage them by the box. So when I harvest is usually after it's gotten cold and they're all clustered down and they're not up in the supers anymore. And so I go out on a nice cool day, 40s would be optimum, but is, you take what you get, and sometimes it's colder than you wanted or whatever, but then I'd start in the yard, I'd start with the top box, and I'd start lifting boxes off until I get down to where I know the bees are in the next box. Usually I look down between the frames and see them in the next box, or I can hear them when I'm starting to get close, but I may go down to where I actually see some, I may pop it off and actually see the bees there, and I know I'm down to that. So now I know kind of how big the cluster is. I have some idea how many bees I have at this point, and now I can judge how much food I want to leave them. If I've got a box, if I've got one medium 8-frame box full of bees, they could probably get by with one box, and I'd probably like to leave the 2 boxes. If I've got 3 boxes full of medium 8-frame boxes full of bees, then I'm probably going to have to leave them 3 or 4 boxes of food. And how big that cluster is depends on a lot of things, like are they Carniolans or Italians or Buckfasts, and it also depends on how late they got split and how well they built back up, and there's lots of things that control how big that cluster is. But I want to judge how big it is so I can truly, because I don't know where people come up with these formulas, but you read all the books, they act like this is some science of okay, I'm in Nebraska, so I overwinter in 2 deeps, and it has to weigh this much. Yeah, but what if I only have a cluster about the size of a softball? I think that's overkill, you know? On the other hand, what if I have this booming Italian cluster that's almost filling 2 boxes going into winter? Maybe that's not enough. Maybe I need to give them more, you know? So I think the one-size-fits-all plan for how you winter is not good. But anyway, back to harvesting. So I got this one down. I put it back on whenever they need. One of the reasons I want to wait this late is I know at this point when the fall flow's over, I already know what's going to happen. Where if I do this early and I'm counting on a fall flow and it fails, then I end up having to feed. And if I do it early and I do get a fall flow, I may actually have to harvest again. This way, I only have to harvest once. I have the resources, so I can probably give everybody honey unless it was a really, really bad year, and I can equalize this all out. So if I leave these 2 boxes, and I got 4 boxes that I was going to harvest, I get to the next one and they got nothing. They're dry. Well, I can leave them a box of honey to get them through the winter that I got from the other hive, and I keep working my way down and see what I got left over when I get to the end. And I'm pretty much just doing this by the box. I'm not pulling frames out. And there's no brood in the supers because they've already contracted the brood nest down, because brood rearing's pretty much over. Probably is over. You never know. Some hives seem to keep a little patch of it going, but probably there's no brood rearing going on, and they've all settled down, and there's no bees in the supers to run out because they're all hunkered down. So I don't have to brush them out. I don't have to chase them out with chemicals. I just pull the boxes off and stick them in the truck. Now, before I was doing that, I'd harvest probably in July, August, and to get the bees out, I just do abandonment. You go in there about, while there's still a flow, before the flow gives out, you go in there just about evening. It's not dark yet. The bees are still flying around, but you know they aren't going to be for much longer. You pull all the boxes off, just set them on their end. And here's the box, just set it on its end, and just keep pulling the boxes off that you're going to harvest, and then by the time it's dark, all those bees have flown back to the hive, and just pick them all up, throw them on the truck, and go. Now, first time I tried that, it was in a dearth. And I said I would never do it again until I was reading C.C. Miller, and it seemed to be his favorite way to do it. And then I started thinking, well, it's more complicated than that. That's the problem with beekeeping. You know, you try something and it fails, and you go, why do all these people think that works? Because it doesn't work for me. And you find out that they're not telling you the whole story. They're telling you they did this, but they're not telling you when they did this and what the conditions were when they did this. And because it really it's an art. It's not a science. If there's a flow or there's not a flow, or they're building up or they're dwindling, yeah.
That's exactly how I feel about no foundation. Putting no foundation. So I think it's just
Yeah. Usually, if other people are doing it and they're succeeding and you're failing, you've got to look at more details, because there's got to be something they're doing at a different time, in a different way, there's something they're doing different, or long time to learn that. There were a lot of things I wrote off in my early years of beekeeping because I never really knew anybody to talk to anyway, and I tried it, it didn't work, so I just said, heck with that, and I meet these people, oh yeah, that works really well. And I gotta figure out what was different. There's usually something different.
Yeah, I have a question. So, thank you, I'm here.
Okay.
Thank you for a great talk. There was a lot of interesting information to think about there. I'm a scientist by training, so I have a scientific question for you to speculate on. So, you were saying that the implication was that the different size foundation, bees make a different size cell, and that gives a different size bee. So, I'm curious about the feedback on the bee physiology for regulating the size of a worker bee in this case. Whether, I mean, how that works, that the bee gets scrunched into a small cell, they stop growing and make a small bee, or if there's plenty of room in the big cell, they keep on growing and make a big bee. And somehow food must regulate this as well, because, I mean, obviously to make a big bee, you're going to need more food. So if you could speculate on that, I really appreciate it.
Well, on the large cell, you're talking about a 21-day cycle, and on a small cell, you're talking about a 19.5-day cycle. So they're actually growing for a whole other day and a half. So as far part of it's time, but then part of the time is driven by them running out of room. This has been observed since Huber's time, and anybody who's been beekeeping very long has seen the big drone cells and these huge drones, and you get laying workers or whatever, or laying a drone laying queen, and you get a bunch of drones that were raised in worker cells. They're tiny. So the cell size drives the size of the bee. How exactly, I don't know, but it does change both the pre and the post capping times on a natural cell. Huber's numbers come to, they almost come to 18 days. It depends on how you add them up, the way he lists them, but basically he says on the 20th day they emerge, but he's counting the day the egg was laid is the first day, so that's a 20-day cycle in theory, but it actually, if you add it all up, it comes closer to almost 18. But anyway, you got a shorter cycle, and that makes a world of difference on a varroa, I think, because it's almost a day and a half, so it's almost 36 hours shorter cycle, and they're laying an egg every roughly 36 hours, so you're getting at least one less varroa there. Then there's some research on male survivorship, because the bee is crowded into the cell so much that that first egg that was the male has to find all those other female and breed with them in order to successfully have a viable varroa at the end of the time. If he gets trapped, he gets stuck somewhere and can't find those females, then they don't get mated and then they aren't viable. And there's some research on the varroas, on the male survivorship in smaller cells that indicates that may also be a part of why it succeeds. I'm not sure why it succeeds. I have theories, but in the end, I just care that it works. And pretty much I went from 100% of them would die when I didn't treat them, and died from varroa. I mean, as evidenced by the dead varroa on the bottom board, and the varroa feces in the brood cells, to I'm losing none of them to varroa, and I consider 100% a pretty significant change. So I think counting mites is a total waste of time. I think counting living hives is a lot more useful, or counting how many die from varroa is a lot more useful. There's been a few studies on small cell, and they always seem to come up with, they're usually short term, and they always just count mites, and then they always, like 2 months into the study, claim that there's more mites in the small cell than the large cell. That might actually be true, because a lot of the mechanism of how this may work is because the cell, if some of why small cell works is because of the attractiveness of a drone cell to a varroa, and what Dee calls her pseudo-drone theory. Her pseudo-drone theory is that the varroa are mistaking our large cells for drone cells. And that's why they're infesting our workers and damaging our workers and shortening their lives, and that's why they don't make it through the winter. And if they're infesting the drones, they'd be doing what they do on Serrana, which is just damaging the drones and not the workers. If they're reproducing in the drone cells, then they're more successful. So you might actually have more varroa 2 months into the season on a small cell hive than you do on a large cell hive. I don't know, I'm not counting mites. I don't really care because in the fall I can't hardly find any, so I'm pretty happy with that. Every fall I have an open house and a bunch of newbies come out to my place and I try to find some varroa to show them. I usually can't find any anymore, so. But I don't really count mites. But anyway, if you're looking at mites, mite counts might actually go up in the spring and then fall off once they stop littering drones in the summer. And then those die off mostly before the winter hits, and then you've got some nice long-lived workers to get through the winter. I don't know what all the mechanisms are. My guess is it's a combination of several of them. I don't know. But that's kind of the way it is when you throw things off balance in nature. It often has several causes that almost seem to conspire against you, you know? Yes. Lunch? Yeah.
I just had one question about extracting from foundationless frames. Are you able to reuse the comb as well as you can with foundation frames after you go through the Untitled extraction process to reuse the wax?
Yes. I just extract them just like you do any other comb and reuse them.
So in terms of damage to the comb,
It's the exact same process. I don't really see a lot of difference. I'm always hesitant to say, well, that you know, I don't want somebody to think you can't blow them out. You can blow anything out if you crank it up fast enough and soon enough, but you can certainly extract them if you're gentle. And I don't think you really have to be that much more gentle than any other kind of. You have to be more gentle than plastic, perhaps, but not any more gentle than wax foundation. So, yeah, I extract them all the time.
Have you noticed a large difference in the honey between when you harvest it after the bees cluster versus harvesting it in July?
There's probably a little more crystallization, but I like mine to crystallize, so I really don't mind.
Okay.
But yeah, it probably does have more crystallization when you do that.
Okay, thank you.
We're going to break for lunch. We'll have plenty of time. If you will, please give Michael a little time to eat, but I'm sure you can.
I want to talk a little about swarm prevention. They kind of go together in more ways than one. I'll talk a little about the instincts of the bees and what makes them swarm and what makes a split work and those kinds of things. This is a picture from Wikipedia of bee swarming. If you've never been in a cloud of bees like this, there's an electricity in the air that's really kind of amazing. You can just feel all the energy and the excitement. And then this is a swarm swarming all over the outside of a box that they've just been shaken into and they haven't decided whether they're going in or out yet. This is what swarms like. You're more likely to see this in a natural comb hive because there was still a gap at the bottom there, and there was kind of they started a comb on the right there, and they started a comb on the left, and there was kind of a gap between the two combs in the middle there, and you see right in the middle there's a whole series of queen cells right down that split in the gap. But these are all swarm cells. Queen cells are always vertical. They stick down. A lot of newbies will mistake a weird drone cell for a queen cell because they were trying to squeeze one in and did it in some weird angle, and you think it's a queen. Straight down, probably not a queen cell, or at least reasonably close to straight down. You can see some of those are running at a 14-degree angle there, but basically that's what a queen. So why do bees swarm? Well, the first thing you got to understand about bees is that the organism isn't the bee. Bees reproduce because the queen, you get more bees because the queen lays eggs and they develop into a bee, right? But how do you end up with another colony? Because really a bee is a superorganism, and in order to start another colony, it takes several things. A queen and a bunch of bees at least, a bunch of workers at least, to start a new colony. Because the queen can't start a colony by herself, and a worker can't start a colony by themselves. It takes a queen and a bunch of bees. So swarming is the instinct by which the superorganism, the colony, reproduces and creates another colony. And actually, oddly enough, it's really the old queen and a bunch of the bees that leave, and the old colony gets the new queen. So I'm not sure which one's the new colony and which one's the old colony. I think really the old colony moved and the new colony is still there. But that depends on your point of view. But basically, these are the reasons they swarm, the things that set them off, that make them think that they want to swarm. One of them is if you just plain let them run out of room. If the hive is in the mode of growing, see, one of the things you need to get a feel for when you're working with bees is during one part of the year there's a buildup, they're getting bigger, and then during another part of the year they're winding down for the fall. Well, usually this happens when the hive's still growing and building and storing honey, and somewhere between spring and the end of the flow, you could just plain run out of room. If they just plain run out of room, they tend to sense that it's time to do something. There's still some stuff coming in. Maybe this is a good time to swarm just because we're not going to be able to feed all these mouths later on, so let's just get rid of some of them and see if they can start another colony. So it's strictly a matter of overcrowding. If it's not during the prime swarm season, when it's really when bees usually try to produce, then usually all you have to do is add some supers. You make some room and you can usually keep them from swarming. But the other thing that happens when they get crowded, and it also happens when they're purposely trying to swarm, is that they run out of room, they start storing honey wherever they can store it, and they start storing it in the brood nest, and the queen runs out of a place to lay, and the sequence of events that sets off swarming starts to happen. We'll talk more about it in a minute. Another reason that's often given is that there's no place to cluster. The reason the slatted rack was invented is it creates a little space underneath where the bees have some place to cluster. You've all seen them on a hot summer night, and they come home and it's too hot in the hive, and there's too many bees, and they're all bearded on the outside, and that's not necessarily going to make them swarm. It's partly how they handle heat, but it's a pretty good indication that they're probably getting crowded, and they could probably use some room. The slatted rack was a way to give them some space to cluster like that. Sometimes not enough ventilation, they get too hot, it seems to set it off, which is why people like screen bottom boards and maybe a top entrance vent to let some of the heat out. But really, I don't find that's hard to deal with. Basically, that's just a question of keeping some supers on, make sure they got room, don't let them run out. But a reproductive swarm usually happens at a particular time of year. Maybe I should say a particular time in the seasons, because sometimes the seasons are early or late. Like last spring was probably a month early, but basically seasons, the bees decide it's that time, and they have enough resources, then they decide they're going to reproduce the colony. I think it's really the goal of a successful colony. Now I know we use these terms and a lot of times the scientists will say, well, that's not really a very accurate term, they're just using this stimuli or that stimuli. It's a nice idea. First of all, though, it's hard for me to think in terms of what's going on if I don't think in terms of their goal. A lot of evidence they do have goals. I've watched them. You watch a colony and sometimes it does not seem to have any goal and it just kind of languishes, and then they make up their mind to do something and suddenly there's this explosive direction that the colony goes as far as building comb or bringing in a harvest or deciding to swarm or whatever it is they decided to do. I think as a colony they make decisions. I think as an individual bee, I don't know, they're just wandering around trying to figure out what needs to happen next, and they base it on what's going on around them. But I think it is the goal of honey to try, because it's the goal of really most every organism on the planet. It's how they ensure the success of their species. They really are preparing the way for this in the fall, because if they put enough stores in the fall, they can build up really early and have enough bees to swarm before the main flow hits, and both and the old colony will have a good chance of surviving and succeeding. If they don't have enough stocked away the fall before, they're probably not going to be able to build up enough in the spring to be able to swarm. So in a way, they're kind of planning that the fall before. The sequence goes that they stock that up. They start rearing some brood late in the winter. I don't know about your location. Even in my location, it varies. It could be mid-March to, it could even be as late February. They could be rearing some brood, a little patch of brood, and then after that patch has emerged, they'll take a little break and then they'll start another little patch of brood. But they're trying to get some young bees so they can get going. And then when it starts getting where there's any pollen coming in, then they start getting serious about really raising some brood. And so the population is starting to really grow, and then it finally really starts to peak. And then they start to backfill the brood nest. Now this seems to happen no matter how many supers I pile on in the middle of swarm season. They're still determined to do this. That's just their nature. Where I could just throw more supers on them in the flow and it would probably stop them. It doesn't seem to stop them during the prime swarm season. They've started backfilling the brood nest, not because there wasn't room in the supers, but because they're just determined to shut the queen down. So once they start backfilling the brood nest, what happens is the bees that are emerging, you always hear them talk about the sequence of what the bees do at various times in their life. And in the middle of the flow, it's probably a pretty accurate sequence. But right here, when they're getting ready to swarm, the sequence gets disrupted. What normally happens for a nurse bee is they emerge and they clean cells for a few days and then they start feeding young larvae. And that's their job, Well, when they're backfilling the brood nest, those workers emerge and they look around and there's nothing to do. Those cells already got filled up with, the cells they would have been cleaning already got filled up with nectar. The larvae they would have been taking care of aren't getting laid because all the cells are getting filled with nectar. So they're basically unemployed. And you get a whole bunch of unemployed nurse bees and a queen who's slim enough to fly, because that's the other thing that happens. They backfill the brood nest, the queen has nowhere to lay, so she can't lay. She doesn't ask for so much food. Her ovaries start to shrink down, her belly starts to shrink down, she starts losing weight, and she gets to where she can fly pretty well. So they're slimming down the queen so she can fly, and they're creating a bunch of unemployed nurse bees. So they'll build some queen cells. They usually get the queen to lay in them. When they're getting ready to swarm, she actually kind of staggers this. She'll lay in one cell today, and maybe another one tomorrow, and maybe another one a couple of days later, and maybe another one a couple of days later. And so there may be 20 queen cells in there, and they may be scattered all the way from, this one just has an egg in it, this one has a pretty good sized larva in it, this one's capped, and this one's just about to emerge. And they're all in sequence. That's not what they do when they're doing a supersedure or an emergency. They're all the same age. But when they're getting ready to swarm, they're all different ages. So you've got everything from one that's about to emerge all the way down to the one that just got an egg laid in it. But there'll always be some queen cells there before she leaves. So now we have an old queen, the unemployed nurse bees, and they pack up and go. And you go look in the hive, you see a bunch of queen cells, and you panic that they're going to swarm, and so you destroy all the queen cells. But they already left. You just don't know it. Anyway, then the scout bees will be, you know, they do a little, what would you call it? A temporary, you know, get organized spot. They hang on a tree somewhere, and then they send out scouts, and the scouts find a location. Now, there's always a mixture of bees in this bunch, but most of them tend to be pretty young. But there are also some old field bees who remember some of those hollow trees they've investigated before. So often they have a pretty good idea where they're going before they even get started. I've seen them swarm out, land on the tree. I run in the house to get some stuff. I come out and they're sitting there and I'm just starting to set up some equipment and off they go. I think they already knew where they were going because there wasn't any time to hold the boat. They're gone. On other occasions though, you'll see them hang there for days and they can't make up their mind where they're going. But the scout bees are out looking. They're out looking for a place, trying to find a place, and then they're trying to take a vote to get everybody to agree. Basically, they come back and they say, I got this wonderful place, it's fantastic, you guys need to go see it. And the other ones go, no, I got this wonderful place. And so you have to go see theirs, they have to go see yours, you have to all come back and see if you can come to some kind of consensus. Eventually, they come to some kind of consensus, and then they pack up and go unless they, once in a while, they get stuck and can't. Sort of like Congress, right? They just kind of can't get an agreement and they just get stuck there. So anyway, they find a new location, well then they all fly off and they follow the pheromone trails of the scout bees that are flying back and forth to this new location, to that new location, and then they set up housekeeping. So the next sequence of events, that was the old queen, right? Now we got this whole sequence of all these different age queens in there. So what's going to happen next is that first queen's going to emerge. What's she going to do? No, they won't let her. She'll try. They won't let her kill all the rest of these because they haven't made up their mind whether they're done with this yet or not. So they guard all these other queen cells. They won't let her touch them. Now, if this was a supersedure, they're gone. She'll just kill them all. That's the end of that. But this is a swarm. This is swarming. So we may need an after swarm. They haven't decided if they got rid of enough bees yet or not. They're gonna make that judgment. Sometimes they make it poorly and sometimes they make it really well. There's really not much you can do to help them, but usually they make it well. But once in a while you get one of these swarming hives that just swarms itself to death. It just sends out an after swarm and an after swarm and an after swarm until there's just almost nobody left. But anyway, they're still making up their mind. Now eventually they'll decide, okay, I think that's good enough, and they'll let that queen kill all the other queens. Or they'll decide, no, I don't think so, and then she'll get excited and she'll leave and a bunch of bees will leave with her, and that's an after swarm. They don't tend to be as big. And she's a virgin. The first swarm that left had a mated laying queen in it. This is just a virgin queen that hasn't mated yet. So they swarm. So again, next queen out, they keep her from destroying the other ones until they make up their mind, and if they decide they don't want to, they're done, then they'll let her kill all the rest of the queens. And if they decide they're not done, they'll let her swarm, and they may get a bunch of after swarms. You never know how many. In theory, usually until they think it's appropriate, but sometimes I think they're wrong, and sometimes I think they're right, but usually when I think they're wrong, I'm wrong. But, so let me head off that sequence. I'm going to mention this one briefly because I think it's a very promising one. I haven't had a lot of time to experiment with it, but Walt Wright came up with this idea of nectar management, and basically it's a way to trick the bees into thinking it's not really the appropriate time to leave. And the way you do that is you, above the brood nest, before spring really gets into full roll, probably about February, probably about now, you go in and above the brood nest, not in the brood nest, but above the brood nest, you put drawn empty combs between full capped combs. So basically you've got this one box of capped honey on the hive. You take half of those and move them up a box and intersperse empty combs in between all of those. So basically then the bees, as they move up, they get the sense of, well, you know, we're not starving, but this isn't exactly full either. And so they tend to just keep working at building up and putting away enough honey that they think that they've got enough to be able to swarm. And the people who've done this have reported amazing crops from it because the colony seems to stay more focused on building up and then just starts putting away the harvest, and they don't tend to get distracted with swarming. But he's got a whole manuscript. I think you can find most of this online for free at BeeSource, or you can buy the manuscript on paper from him for $10, or you can get it in a PDF for $8 and print it yourself. And that's his address if you're interested. He's online often on BeeSource too. You can ask him questions on there if you want to discuss it. This is what I usually do. Assuming there's no swarm cells, I try to keep the brood nest open. Basically, you're just trying to reset the sequence of events. The sequence of events is that they're backfilling the brood nest, so the queen has nowhere to lay, so I have all these unemployed nurse bees and so on and so forth. Well, if I stick a bunch of empty frames in the middle of the brood nest, those unemployed nurse bees start drawing comb because they have a job now. There's a hole in the middle of the brood nest that needs to be filled with comb. So they start drawing it. And the queen, as soon as she sees them draw that out even a little bit, goes over there and says, hey, I got a place to lay, and starts laying eggs. And it tends to turn the whole thing around. So now I've employed the nurse bees, I've got the queen laying again, I've got a place for all this to happen, and the brood nest isn't crowded anymore. And I may have to do this twice on a really, really booming hive, but usually once is enough for a typical hive to turn that around and get them past that swarm season and get them into putting away the harvest. Expanding the brood nest to the next box up is what D. Lusby calls pyramiding up. Basically, she's taken some frames from this bottom box and bringing them up to the next box up to get them to expand the brood nest up. And then she'll probably do that twice in the course of a year. She'll take a few of these and move them up to this box, and then she'll take a few of the bottom and the middle box and move them up to the next box, so that it looks kind of like a pyramid. It looks kind of like a pyramid. You know, it's the widest at the brood nest is the widest at the bottom, and it's the narrowest at the top because you got like maybe 2 frames of brood that you just brought up here, maybe 3 or 4 here, and 6 or 7 down here. So it kind of goes up to a point. It's basically the same concept as opening up the brood nest. In fact, it's probably what you do when you open up the brood nest, because whatever you pull out, you got to put somewhere, so you end up juggling it around. She just has a more descriptive term for how she juggles them around, and she juggles them around in the shape of a pyramid. So now the unemployed nurse bees have a job, the queen has somewhere to lay, and things go back to reasonably normal, hopefully. Actually, you can open up the brood nest pretty early if you don't get carried away. The main thing is to keep in mind how cold it is outside, how much brood they've got, how many bees they've got. If you've got a little tiny cluster, you really can't do anything with that. If you've got a hive that's really booming in April, you can do this in April, but if it's not really booming, you probably don't want to break the brood nest up if they don't have enough bees to keep that brood warm. In other words, you don't want to spread them too thin. So it's a kind of an art. It's a judgment call to look in there and say, well, I think I can, I think I can't. But if you want a rule of thumb, my rule of thumb is that if you make an empty space, you're going to put an empty frame in, and they can quickly fill it with festooning bees, you can probably put one in there. If they can't quickly fill it, then there's not enough bees here. You're pushing it. You need to just put it back together and worry about it later. Anytime you see the brood nest getting backfilled, though, it's probably not a bad idea to do this. And you definitely want to try and do it before they start building swarm cells. In my experience, once they start building swarm cells, I don't think it's worth trying to stop them. I won't say you can't ever succeed, but you'll succeed so seldom that it's better just to plan on failing. Figure they're going to swarm, so I'm just going to help them do it, and I'm going to split them. I see a bunch of swarm cells. I love swarm cells because as long as it's not one of those really swarmy hives that likes to swarm itself to death, I end up with a lot of really good queens off of it because they're usually really well fed. It's the right time of year. There's plenty of drones. They're probably going to be really good queens. So I'll usually take every frame that has at least 1 queen cell on it, put it in a split with a frame of honey, and split them all into a whole bunch of mating nukes if I got them around. Then I only need 2 frames, a frame of brood with that queen cell and a frame of honey for some food, and shake an extra frame of bees in there and call it good. Don't shake these off of a frame that has a queen on it, you can damage the queen. Shake them off of a brood comb that doesn't have a queen cell on it because you don't want to damage the queen cells. And I always leave a queen cell with the old one. I know everybody's like, well, if I leave a queen cell with the old one, then they might swarm. The queen might leave them. Yeah, but they might already swarm. You don't know that. Unless you saw the queen, I wouldn't count on her being there. Plus, there's a good chance you need to replace her anyway, and that'll just be a supersede your cell once you split them all to the four winds, where there's none of these are really feeling like they're ready to swarm anymore. So I always make sure every one of those splits has a queen cell. That's what I do. And do they ever swarm when I do that? Probably, but not very often. Swarm cells make swarming bees. This is a quote I really liked. For years, our bee journals have been printing reams of articles on the question of non-swarming strain of bees. It's always seemed to me there was a lot of time wasted advocating such an improbable accomplishment, because nature would hardly yield to an arrangement that in itself might destroy the species. If accomplished, it would be tantamount to breeding the mating instincts out of domestic animals. So I don't really, I admit, there is a, it's one of those things, it's not all one thing and it's not all the other thing. There is such a thing as swarmy bees. But just because bees are trying to swarm does not mean they're swarmy bees. It means they're bees. They're trying to reproduce. It's what bees do. Swarmy bees, to me, are the ones that they swarm and they after swarm and they after swarm and they after swarm and they after swarm until there's no bees left. That's a problem for a beekeeper. There may not be a problem for bees. Maybe some of those swarms probably survive, but it's not very good for the beekeeper. I probably don't want to breed from bees like that, but I do. But just because they're trying to swarm is not. I don't hold that against them. So how do you split swarm committed hive? Well, I said this before. I kind of like to try and salvage all the queens I can get out of it. Now, if you're a hobbyist and you're determined that you only want one hive, I don't know what to tell you. I think you're wrong. That's what I'll tell you. I think you need to have at least. I think you need to think more in terms of I want somewhere between 1 and 4 hives, but I'd really like to stay at 2.